In 1660, after 11 grim years of the Puritan Commonwealth, a time without a king, without Christmas, and without theaters, England was weary of austerity. The nation craved change. They craved a king, and the king they got did not disappoint. He was Charles II, son of the beheaded king. But he was nothing like his father. Tall, dark, charismatic, and sharply intelligent, he brought the sophistication of the French court and a burning zest for life forged through years of perilous exile. He was the king who brought laughter, color, and decadence back to England. Known as the Merry Monarch, he was a ruler whose reign was as vibrant as it was scandalous. But behind the smiles, witty quips, and a long list of mistresses was a masterful political Minda survivor who had learned bitter lessons from his father's mistakes. This is the story of a king who turned his court into an endless party, but also deftly navigated one of the most dangerous political eras, and most importantly, died in his bed, not on the scaffold. Charles II's life didn't begin in luxury. It began in flight. As a teenager, he watched his father's kingdom crumble. He fought in the English Civil War, and after defeat, he became a fugitive. The most famous story came after the Battle of Worcester in 1651, when he spent 6 weeks on the run. Disguised as a peasant, he once hid in an old oak tree to evade Cromwell's soldiers. The years that followed were ones of impoverished exile across Europe, from France to the Netherlands, surviving on the charity of other kings. It was during this time that Charles honed his most vital skills: charm, adaptability, patience, and a deep cynicism about human nature. He learned that to survive, you had to be a brilliant actor. After Oliver Cromwell's death, the Commonwealth collapsed. England was exhausted by military rule. In 1660, they did the unthinkable. A decade earlier, they invited Charles back to take the throne. His return, known as the Restoration, was a national celebration. On his 30th birthday, Charles entered London in a triumphant procession. Thousands lined the streets cheering. Church bells rang. Wine flowed freely. The darkness of the Puritan era was over. The party had begun. And Charles' first act as king revenge. He ordered Oliver Cromwell's body exhumed, hanged, and beheaded. A clear message: the revolutionary era was over. The monarchy was back. Charles was determined to make his court the opposite of Cromwell's austerity. He reopened the theaters. He hosted lavish balls and all-night feasts. He loved gambling, horse racing, and science. His court became a hub of creativity, wit, and scandal. At the heart of the scandal was the king's love life. Charles married a Portuguese princess, Catherine of Braganza, but their marriage was childless, and Charles was far from faithful. He had at least 12 acknowledged illegitimate children with a string of mistresses. His lovers were not shameful secrets. They were public figures, celebrities with power and influence. The most famous was Nell Gwynn, a poor-born actress whose talent and wit won over both the king and the people. Then there was Barbara Villiers, Duchess of Cleveland, a beautiful but ambitious and volatile woman. Charles' court was a stage, and he was its director. But his reign wasn't all parties. It was also plagued by disasters. In 1665, the Great Plague swept through London, killing a quarter of the city's population. Charles and his court fled. Just a year later, in 1666, the Great Fire of London erupted. For 4 days, it razed much of the medieval city, including St. Paul's Cathedral. Far from the image of a pleasure-seeking king, Charles acted decisively. He personally joined firefighting efforts, organized rescue teams, and distributed food. These disasters, along with a failed war against the Dutch, tested his leadership. But through a mix of charm and practical action, he steered the country through its worst crises. Behind the merry facade, Charles was fighting a covert political war as dangerous as his father's. If you want to know how he used cunning and ruthless tactics to outmaneuver Parliament and religious conspiracies, subscribe and turn on notifications. This is where the Merry Monarch reveals himself as a shrewd politician. Like his father and grandfather, Charles constantly clashed with Parliament over money and religion. Parliament wanted control over the budget. Charles wanted financial independence. Religion was even trickier. England's Parliament was fiercely Anglican, but Charles had Catholic sympathies. His wife was Catholic, his mother was Catholic, and secretly he leaned toward Catholicism himself. He tried to pass declarations of indulgence, allowing freedom of worship for Catholics and nonconformist Protestants, but Parliament reacted fiercely, forcing him to back down. Charles' genius lay in knowing when to retreat. Unlike his father, who confronted Parliament head-on, Charles used guile. He secretly signed the Treaty of Dover with France's King Louis XIV, accepting French money in exchange for a promise to convert to Catholicism at an opportune moment. Essentially, he became a paid agent of the French king to avoid dependence on Parliament. In 1678, England was gripped by paranoid hysteria known as the Popish Plot. A disreputable cleric named Titus Oates fabricated a story about a vast Catholic conspiracy to assassinate the king and place his Catholic brother James on the throne. The story was a complete lie, but in the anti-Catholic climate, it sparked a witch hunt. Dozens of innocent Catholics were tried and executed. This fabricated plot led to a real political crisis, the Exclusion Crisis. Parliament, led by the Earl of Shaftesbury, tried to pass a law barring James from the succession. This was the greatest challenge to Charles' reign. He believed in legitimate succession. He fought to protect his brother's rights. For 3 years, he dissolved one parliament after another to block the Exclusion Bill. Ultimately, using French funds and suppressing political opponents, he prevailed. In his final years, Charles ruled without Parliament, much like his father. But unlike his father, Charles had learned his lesson. He avoided imposing controversial new taxes. French money kept him afloat. He ruled as a cunning autocrat, rewarding friends and punishing enemies with precision. He survived it all: civil war, exile, plague fire, and political plots. In February 1685, Charles fell suddenly ill, likely from a stroke. On his deathbed, his wit remained intact. He apologized to those around him for taking so long to die. Then he revealed his final secret. He asked his brother James to bring a Catholic priest. In his final hours, King Charles II, defender of the Anglican faith, was received into the Roman Catholic Church. Charles II's legacy is a dual one. The merry monarch restored joy and vitality to a dour nation. He patronized science and the arts, founding the Royal Society and the Greenwich Observatory. He brought relative stability after decades of chaos. But the politician Charles II left a complex legacy. His reliance on French money, conflicts with Parliament, and insistence on protecting his Catholic brothers. Succession directly led to another revolution, just 3 years after his death. So who was Charles II? Was he just a playboy king obsessed with women and parties? Far from it. He was a master performer. The merry monarch persona was his greatest weapon. It made his political enemies underestimate him. It made the people love him. It was a mask that hid a razor-sharp political mind, one that learned from years of exile that the best way to hold power was to never seem too desperate for it. Charles II ruled by a golden rule forged from his father's tragic death: never do anything that would force him to go on his travels again. And in that he succeeded brilliantly. He was the ultimate survivor, a king who danced on the edge of a political volcano and somehow never fell in. Charles succeeded in keeping his throne, but his protection of his Catholic brother set the stage for a bloodless revolution. To see how the story ends, you must watch The Glorious Revolution: How England Ousted a King Without a Civil War. Subscribe to explore the event that forever changed the relationship between king and country.